Hey there, fourth grade. It's Mr. Remedies back with another mini lesson in reading language arts. And man, oh man, do we have a good one for you today? We have one that is centered around a skill that is incredibly important, not just to your success here in fourth grade, but here on out, as long as you are studying literature and stories throughout your academic career. This is going to be incredibly important to you. I hope you're strapped in because it's going to be amazing. Right there on your screen today is all about how authors choose the narrator and perspective of the story. All right, as always, you know what's coming up next. We got some learning goals, we got some success criteria, and we're going to jump right in today. All right, above my head here, we have that learning goal. We are learning to notice the narrator and the perspective of a story. All right, to do that, we have some things we want to hit along the way, some I can statements, boom, right over yonder here. Like I can define narrator, I can define point of view, I can define first person point of view, and I can define third person point of view. That's a whole lot of vocabulary today. But in addition to that vocabulary, we have two other I can statements, like I can identify the narrator of the story, very important, and I can determine the narrator's point of view, right, which is super important when we read stories. So let's move from our learning goals and success criteria to some vocabulary so we know we can be successful and so we can have an idea of what we're talking about today. All right, guys, our learning vocabulary, we got a whole bunch of it. Look on the screen, there's a bunch of it. There's a bunch of it. All right, first word is narrator. I believe y'all are pretty familiar with what the narrator is, but just as a review, the narrator is the person or character that is telling the story. We have point of view. That is the narrator's position in the story, and we'll learn more about that here in a little bit. We have something called first person point of view, which is a style of writing where the narrator is experiencing the story and telling the events from their perspective. Right? Then we'll dive deeper into that as well. And we'll also be diving into third person point of view, but the definition of that is a style of writing where the narrator is not experiencing the story, but telling the events from kind of a knows everything perspective, right? So we'll dive deeper. We'll get some clarity on all those. So let's move from our vocabulary to an example. And that example comes from a book we've already seen. We're talking about jalapeno bagels. I've got my copy of jalapeno bagels right here. I would like you guys to give it a little look. Not a little look. You can't see me on. You can't see the book. I'd like you to give it a little listen as I read a couple of pages. We're trying to identify the narrator. So I want you to think, as I read, who is narrating the story? Who is telling the story? All right, here we go. Boom, story time, Mr. Remedies. Early Sunday morning, when it is still dark, my mother wakes me up. Pablo, it's time to go to work, she says. We walk down the street to the bakery. My father turns on the lights. My mother turns on the ovens. She gets out the pans and ingredients for pan dulce. Pan dulce is a Mexican sweetbread. I help my mother mix and knead the dough. She shapes rolls and loaves of bread and slides them into the oven. People tell her she makes the best pan dulce in town. Maybe I'll bring pan dulce to school, I tell her. Next, we make empanadas, pumpkin turnovers. I'm in charge of spooning the pumpkin filling. Mama folds the dough in half and presses the edges with a fork. She bakes them until they are flaky and golden brown. Some customers come to our bakery just for her turnovers. Maybe I'll bring empanadas instead. You'll figure it out, she says. Ready to make chongo bars? Chongo means monkey man. Mama lets me pour in the chocolate chips and nuts. When she's not looking, I pour in more chocolate chips. That's pretty funny. I could bring chongo bars. They're my favorite dessert, I say. Mine too, says Mama. This batch should be especially good. I put in extra chips. So, that's a little bit of an excerpt here. Really nice little story about acceptance and one's culture. So, let's move on to a couple of questions we have about this particular text. So, let's talk about identifying the narrator in Jalapeno Bagels. My question is, who is the narrator? Who is telling the story? Right? Well, that is the character of Pablo. Right? Now, in the excerpt that I read, you only hear the name Pablo one time, and that is when Pablo's mother is calling his name. Right? How do you know Pablo is the narrator? Well, he uses words like we walk, we mix the ingredients, I help my mother, right? I could take the empanadas to school. I could take the pan dulce to school. So we can use the language in the sentences themselves to identify the narrator. Right? This is what we call first person point of view. Pablo is a character in the story, and he is the one telling the story. So we are experiencing the story through his perspective. Right? We know what Pablo knows because he is telling us, but we don't know what's going on, like inside his mother's thoughts or his dad's thoughts. So we consider this, or we identify this narrator as a first person point of view. All right. Let's look at another example. And that second example comes from a wonderful, wonderful book. Oh my goodness, so good. Called Rescue and Jessica. Remember, we read this in the first semester. It's about, as the title says, a life-changing partnership between Jessica, who is an amputee, and Rescue, who happens to be a service dog. So I'm going to read from my own copy here. Oh, sorry. Oh, my own copy here. And I'd like you to pay attention, just like we did in the last example, of some of the grammar that you hear, some of the word choices, and see if you can identify the narrator. Right? So here we go. Back in the country, Rescue was learning how to be a service dog. When he wore his blue cape, that meant he was in training. He had to stay by his partner's side. He fetched all kinds of things. He even learned how to open doors. Rescue, you're a natural, said his trainer. At the hospital, Jessica was learning new ways to do things that used to come easily. She used a wheelchair to get around. She practiced getting out of bed differently. She put on a prosthetic leg so she could stand. She was learning how to walk again, even though her right leg was still hurt. Jessica, you are becoming strong, said her doctors. Rescue was proud of all that he had accomplished, but he still worried. He was named in honor of a brave firefighter. He had big shoes to fill. Rescue wanted to help people, just like his namesake. Jessica knew she had to make a lot of progress, but she was frustrated and sad about the things she couldn't do. She wondered if she would ever be happy again. She felt like the changes were too big, too much. What a great story. I'm going to leave that there. See if y'all can't check it out online. That's called Rescue and Jessica, a life-changing friendship. Very cool story. Let's go back to our questions and let's see if we can identify. So in Rescue and Jessica, again, same question as before. Who is the narrator? Who is the person telling the story? Is it a character in the story? Is it Rescue? Is it Jessica? Is it someone else? Some of you are like, "Oh, Mr. Ramirez, I don't know. It doesn't ever say." And that's okay. No one knows. I don't know who the narrator is either. I just know that it is some unnamed character. I don't know if it's a friend of theirs. I don't know if it's some just magical narrator that knows everything. But whomever it is, no one knows if it's a character in the story. And that's quite all right to have narrators like that. How do we know that this character is unnamed? Well, we can look at the grammar of the sentences. The narrator names the characters, okay, by their proper names. So Jessica was learning. Rescue was learning. He wore. She wondered. Okay. So by paying extra special attention to the grammar of the sentence, to the author's word choice, we can start to identify the narrator better. When we see something like this, where the narrator is an unnamed character, and they are using these proper nouns, Jessica rescue, he, and we can kind of identify that the narrator is kind of not really involved in the story, then we call that, boom, third person point of view, right? Imagine you guys do this. Imagine after watching a movie, you go and tell someone about it. Well, now you are a third person narrator. So that's what it would look like in real life. Boom. All right. All right. Let's move on to review. We talked about fictional stories will always have a narrator, and that's the person who tells the story. Right. And you guys knew that. I think that's something you guys came to fourth grade knowing. The narrator is written in first person point of view or third person point of view, right? Especially for stories. First person point of view, we got a handy dandy little table right there. First person point of view, we determine by reading sentences with a lot of I, we, me. It seems like the narrator is experiencing the story. It seems like they're a character right in the middle of things. Okay? So that would be our jalapeno bagels. Stories are also written in third person point of view. You can identify this when we read sentences with a lot of he, she, and they, and not very many, or actually no I or we or me, right? So, just to get that clarity there. Right? And last but not least, and there's a little bit of mini real talk, authors' choices of a narrator and point of view have major effects on how the reader understands, interprets, and enjoys the story. Right? If we're in first person and the narrator doesn't have a generally good idea of what's about to happen, then we're going to experience that through their perspective. Okay, and when things get a little hairy and we're reaching that climax of that story and that tension's building in the story, then we're gonna feel what the narrator feels in first person. In third person books, we are going to experience all of the tension from all of the characters, and we kind of are like a spectator at a sporting event. We get to watch it all unfold, and so we understand the story differently. We enjoy the story a little bit differently, and so authors need to make those choices based on what they want you to do, and based on the message they want to convey to you. All right, a lot of cool information today. I know we just put a whole bunch of information on you, but you guys can handle it. You guys know that this is all for your success. All right. As always, I've been Mr. Remedies. You guys have been absolutely crushing it across Copperscove, Texas, and we will see you next time. Adios.